but it goes really fast, and a big part of it is internship, obviously, as we all know. And so some of you are facing that immediate pressure to apply. And it's really scary, and it's also kind of an ambiguous process. I think some of that is made easier now through the API online. It's a pretty straightforward process. I don't know how many of you pulled it up and looked at it, but it's the online part is really just filling in boxes and checking stuff off. The written materials are what I wanted to focus on more today, because those are really your chance to let them know who you are. I mean, everyone's going to have, hours between 1,000 and 2,000, and everyone's going to fall within a certain number of assessments to make the cut for whichever site. But I think a lot of the times what pushes you over to get the interview is your written materials and sounding knowledgeable and sounding confident in your skills, and selling yourself a little bit in those written materials. And so then the goal is to get the interview. And then once you get the interview, that's kind of when the real pressure happens. I hate to tell you, but interviews are a huge deal. They really are when they make their decision. I mean, and I think I'll come back later in the semester and maybe we can do some practice interviews, because that was the most important thing that I did, hands down. I walked in there knowing what I was going to say, knowing, what my most challenging case was, knowing what my ethical dilemma was. And if you're not prepared for that, you could really bomb. So there's just a few different questions that are good to know, and they seem like pretty much that's what they ask at most sites. So later in the semester, hopefully we'll get a chance to get together and do some practice rounds and get your nerves out, because that's a huge deal. It's just to feel that anxiety. What do I say? So now back to, what do you say when you start writing? I was going to start with the cover letters, and cover letters, some people say they're really generic and that they all just need to, the advice I got when I was preparing for this was just don't mess up in your cover letter. Make it generic, make it sound good, and do not mess up. Okay, that's important, that's true, but also I think you need to really be deliberate in what you put in there. For myself, I was applying to only VA hospitals, so my cover letters were pretty much the same, because VA training is more or less pretty similar throughout the country. So I was able to really tailor my letters for VA. Something I would do in your letters and your CV if you're going to be applying to some counseling center, some community mental health, something like that, make 2 different sets and really think about having a different set that addresses different things that you've done, experience, interests in both of the cover letters. Kind of start brainstorming that. Don't sit down with the expectation that today I'm going to write 8 cover letters. Maybe sit down pretty soon and think, okay, I'm going to write out what are my talking points in my cover letters, because you can feel so overwhelmed by this so fast and think, how am I going to make 20 applications instead of that? Well, they're pretty repetitive, so you'll get it done, but don't sit down thinking, okay, today I'll write all my essays, or today I'll finalize this and submit it. It's just not going to happen that way. It's going to take a lot of time to kind of go over and fine-tooth comb it and get it to where you think you're expressing yourself, which is so hugely important. In the handout I gave you, I talked about some of the areas to consider in your cover letter. Make sure to say the program, and if they have different tracks, the track that you're interested in. That's really embarrassing if you don't. Like, my training director would talk about, well, I had to call this person and ask them which track they were interested in, or they put 2 and you can only put 1. Like, you're just not reading the directions, basically. And it's fine, he wasn't not going to invite him because of that, but it's just kind of embarrassing. Talk a little bit about your educational background, getting my doctorate at this place, and I think some of the most important things to put in there is why that internship's a good fit for you. So for me, I'm interested in PTSD and trauma. The VA seems like a natural fit, especially with evidence-based treatments and PTSD and things like that. And so that, made a really kind of easy way of saying why VA was good for me. So think about that. If you're wanting to do counseling, why is the university counseling a good place for you? And that's the stuff, to be brainstorming. I mean, that's the stuff that's going to come to you driving home, and you're going to have to jot it down and think, okay, here's what I'm thinking here. And then also, kind of piggybacks on that, but how that internship site contributes to what you want to do and who you want to be as a psychologist. So, long-term goal for me is to continue trauma treatment research. VA fits right into that also. So just being succinct with that and letting them know that you really are sincere with that site, it's somewhere you deliberately chose and that you really want to be, is pretty huge. You can also talk about your experience that you had before the internship. So in VA, I know it was a huge deal if you worked at a VA, and I was working at a VA, so I just put a whole big fat paragraph in there about that and put that it had been going really well and that I enjoyed it and I was looking forward to being able to do more, function as more of a psychologist in VA. And you can see I gave you a copy of one of my cover letters, the one that I sent to my internship site. And so you'll see my big old paragraph in there where I'm like, you want me and I want to be there. Going along with that, be confident in your strength. It's hard sometimes to be that way when it's like, well, I don't know, I haven't worked full time yet. I don't know if I even like this whole psychology thing beyond school. But you will. You're good at it. And to sell that and express yourself in a confident manner. Where you talk about what you're bringing to the table for them. At the same time, don't use the flowery, exaggerated language, incredibly eager, and things like that. Just don't go over the top with it. Be professional and be sure of your skills. So that's pretty much cover letter. Cover letters are a bear, but once you get kind of a format that you like, and you think of, okay, what am I trying to say? Who am I in this letter? They're pretty easy. I mean, I was able to use that letter and just apply for a job with it and just was able to okay, here's what this is who I am, and I can take out this paragraph and put in about internship. And so once you get a good format, it's not too terrible at all. So really that first one is like the hurdle. Any questions about cover letters? Has anyone started to try to write them?
Are all of yours, you're only one page? Or did some of yours?
It doesn't actually matter in the Appy Online because you cut and paste it in there.
Right.
So the page doesn't really matter.
Okay.
So you don't want to blather on too much.
Yeah, there's a word limit, I think, or character limit. But I think if, like mine, I fit that onto one page today.
With some of your margin changes?
Yeah. So, but that was just to copy that off.
Okay, so it can be a little bit longer.
Yeah, so it went a little over, but I would rather have what I need to say in there than worry about some rule that I don't know if anyone cares about.
And when you, this is kind of a silly question, but on the Appy, did you cut and paste this exact thing, or was it more just the deer, starting at the deer?
I think it was probably just the deer.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was probably just to save myself formatting.
Mm-hmm.
I might have put the address part also, just so they knew I knew where I was going or something.
Right.
But I can't remember. You can just kind of figure that out as you go. And you have to save it as a text file and then put it in or something, or if you save it from it, I have text files of all of them, and I didn't quite know why. But I think it's because if you save what you submitted, it saves it as a text file. I don't know. It's really not very hard, the online thing. It's pretty awesome, I think. I think that it's saving us a lot of hassle as applicants.
So it's fast.
Yeah. And I think money too. I mean, honestly, freak out and overnight that stuff. It's a lot of money. Any other questions? I think, really important is just why you fit at this place, what you're bringing to the table, and just deliberately saying that is pretty huge, and what training they can provide that further benefits you, because you haven't arrived, you're going there to be trained. What are they going to do that meets your goals? So then I just put a few pointers in about the essays. I mean, the essays are something that are so personal. I mean, they're very much your creation, and you know, y'all might look at mine in there as samples and just be like, oh my god, this is ridiculous. But you know, it was very much where I was at the time, and a lot of them for me now wouldn't say the same thing as any stretch. But you know, think about where you are and how you want to talk about yourself. I will say the most challenging one, I think, by far, is the first one, that autobiographical statement. If that's still what it is, I couldn't look at that because I wasn't sure. Okay, that one. Unless you're just some gifted creative writer, it stinks. It's really a hard essay to write. Just try to put something personal about yourself in there without obviously, you know, over self-disclosing. So like I chose a really neutral subject, and wrote about my dog, and like he was my lead-in, and it's about how at APA I found out he was 103 out of 110 on intelligence in dog breeds. Ouch. You know, so it was able to be kind of cute and funny without just kind of being boring about my journey in psychology. You know, that's what it is. But that's really hard to do, and it was kind of like, when you think of the topic, it's kind of like you got struck by lightning, like, oh, I can do this, and maybe it'll work, and maybe it won't. But hopefully, you know, you can come up with something a little different. But it's hard, and you'll kind of agonize over that one, so just be ready. And that's definitely not the one to sit down and think, oh, I'm going to knock that one out today. No, you're going to like have some ideas, and you're going to go back and forth, and have someone read it and change your mind. So,
who would you have read your essay?
You know, I had other people in the program read it. My mom's an English teacher, so I had her read it for grammar. It's always really handy.
The career services office, like I wouldn't do it, but I work over there, but someone else would do it. But they can like read that stuff too and edit it. More grammar stuff, but also kind of looking at what you're selling and stuff. Plug for career services.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
reads mine, I'll read theirs.
Exactly, and I think that's important to have someone in psychology read it, because they know what you're trying to say, like they know the prompt, and so if your cohort can kind of get together on that, and you can feel comfortable sharing that stuff, I think that's a huge, important resource to use, because they know the topic. Like even, like my mom's great with grammar and stuff, but she doesn't know a thing about different theoretical orientations, and you know, am I addressing what I need to be addressing in the essay? But having that outside eye can even tell you, like, is it structured well, and you know, am I getting across a point when I'm writing this? So I think, you know, each other are your biggest resource with that. Even though it can kind of be uncomfortable because you're all going through the same process, and so there can kind of be a competitive spirit sometimes. I know that's happened in intern classes, and they don't use each other during this process, and that's really unfortunate because this whole thing sucks. And if you don't have some support, it's going to be worse. So just reach out to each other, you know, get together and have essay reading nights, and just, you know, make it as decent a time as you can, and as supportive of each other as you can. Because it, you know, in the end, you're probably not going to be competing against one another. You're competing against 3,000 other people who are great and who are really experienced. And the sooner you can feel secure in yourself and who you are as a clinician, the better that whole process will go.
Speaking of experience, I think most of us came with a bachelor's, and I know you did. So, did you find that to be a problem or like an issue with age? No.
Not at all, but I didn't, you know, I mean, I applied only BA, and I know that they're okay with it if you have a bachelor's. There's some other sites that required a master's, and so those are just kind of out for us. I mean, it's kind of like, well, you know, there went that. So I was lucky and that I didn't have to, and I think what that comes down to, what I've heard, is the billing thing. They can't bill if you don't have a master's, and so a lot of community mental health agencies are like that. But not all, and I think it varies by state. So that's just kind of something to consider while you're, you know, probably right now where y'all are, is just weeding out sites and looking at where you want to apply. And so if you don't have the master's, make sure you look at that box, because you don't want that to be a reason that you put all this work into it and don't get an interview. But I think there's plenty of sites out there, and I never once had any sort of like prejudice or anything because I didn't have a master's.